Hello, a mate of mine was saying he likes the videos but don't make the backgrounds interesting enough. So here you go, Capitol Hill up here in DC. Obviously a tremendous amount going on here regarding energy after probably the single biggest piece of energy legislation in US history with the passing of the IRA, not to mention the Infrastructure Act, which is a big deal. And the current argument here is around what qualifies for an EV credit, which is a big deal. There's also a major question mark over how you handle what comprises green hydrogen, etc. But I think the big one ultimately is going to be this EV credit, where there's essentially provisions in there which were deliberately, as I understand it, provisions put in by Joe Manchin, essentially not to make it particularly easy to qualify for the credits without being entirely US built, and that's where the battleground now lies, among many others. One thing that was pointed out to me on being here was that there was a dreadful ruling against the oils, from the point of view of the oils, this week in the Supreme Court, where essentially the oils had put it to the Supreme Court that them being sued on the basis of climate change, being responsible for climate change, should be made a federal issue. And the Supreme Court has actually ruled that no, that is a state issue, and that's just a disaster for the big oils that happened on Monday this week, insofar as they're essentially going to have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars now fighting every state that wants to come at them for climate change or being responsible for climate change, which is, pretty much meritless, and they'll fight it, but it's just going to cost them a ton of money. And one of my lines about the global environmental movement, unfortunately, is that the big winners, particularly in the US, are going to be lawyers. And believe me, I just met 2 lawyers. They're doing just great. In fact, I was talking about how back in the good old days, we'd come here from Wall Street, and everyone from Washington would be trying to get a job down on Wall Street where the big money was. Now, unfortunately, ever since they worked out how to print dollars or at least that the federal government can print as many dollars as they want, all the money is here and all the lavishness is here. And of course, it's not about being a politician, it's about being a lobbyist. They always said in the global financial crisis, basically, the problem started on Wall Street when smart people started going there, and they effectively ruined the entire thing. You can debate actually whether or not the global financial crisis was pretty much caused by Washington forcing people to lend money to people they shouldn't have, but that's a totally different story. The smart people went to Wall Street and then screwed it all up, and now the smart people are all in Washington. Are they politicians? Well, if you think about it, you're not going to be a smart person and be a politician, are you? You're going to own a politician, and that's essentially what happens. Anyway, that's my rant. So there's a bad judgment against the big oils. There's ongoing debate, and my main conclusion from coming here is we've got to come back, and we'll bring a client trip up here and go through some of this stuff line by line. One of the big ones, which is really big, is that my understanding is that from the EPA, but now with the White House, is a ruling that would effectively make it all but impossible to run a coal-fired or natural gas-fired power plant in the US without carbon capture. Essentially, the emissions controls are going to be so severe that you're going to have to go down the carbon capture route, which of course is another angle that we've very much been looking at in terms of the IRA. If you recall, a few months ago we wrote about Oxy having $25 of upside in its share price if you subscribe to the idea of carbon capture being a big deal in the future, which we do. Oxy's very well positioned for that. So carbon capture is a big deal, and that seems to be ongoing, and watch for that EPA ruling. EVs is going to be controversial, and Manchin is digging in. But at the same time, he kind of got what he wanted, and so we'll see. There's one line which is that he's saying that he didn't realize that there was a free trade agreement with Europe, and that affected some of his judgment on this stuff. But as you can tell, it's an ongoing debate and one to be watched very closely. The bottom line is, again, none of this is adding up very positive for the oils. And clearly, as I say, what amounts to the biggest piece of legislation in US history on energy is going to have huge impacts over the coming 5, 10, and 20 years. We've seen this before with ethanol, insofar as what we thought was a pretty dodgy idea, and certainly not particularly environmentally friendly, is still with us today. That legislation, if I remember rightly, was signed in 2005, and we hated it at the time, and it's still here today. So I think an iteration of the IRA, because the way these things work, as you know, is that they write the law and then they argue about what it truly says in the law, and that's the debate that's currently going on with EVs, that's the debate that's currently going on in hydrogen. So it'll all take time to play out, but this has become really the bedrock of the Biden administration's legislative, arguably, success in this first term. And here they're saying that Uncle Joe is definitely running for a second term. There's no question that he will be the guy. And so essentially, and also don't underestimate him. He's not as bad. He's always been, one of the lines I heard was he's always been a bad public speaker. He's always had that issue of the stutter. Others say, he can hardly physically make it, which, is questionable. And people have pointed out that Hillary struggled on the road when she was a presidential candidate, and she was an awful lot younger than Joe. So we'll see how that goes. The other thing here, by the way, is that people really don't want Donald Trump back here, Republican or Democrat. So we'll see how that works out. Paul Sankey in Washington. You.